the whole criminal justice system in Australia is focused on welfare recipients who rort the system. There's no focus on the system rorting welfare recipients. That's a gross injustice. Will you please help me to do something about that? Hello, I'm Ron Medlicott. I want to have a talk about what the definition of breaching is, because it's very important. If you've ever been breached, you know what it is, but the definition may be the key to getting compensation for having been breached. I want to talk about your human rights. Something very important to all welfare recipients, but something which you don't have access to. Okay, breaching. If you've seen some of my other videos, you'll know that I've talked a lot about breaching. Today's the 28th of April 2011, and at 10:30 this morning I went down to the Elizabeth Police Station and talked about breaching triggered deaths. I didn't have the foggiest idea what I was talking about because they didn't know what breaching was. The targeted and therefore deliberate removal of the only means of support from people who had no other means of support, so that for 3 months they were unable to meet their basic costs of living. What you're looking at there is a deliberate act of reckless endangerment. They set out to stop people from being able to meet the basic survival costs, and people didn't survive. We all know about the 4 ceiling insulation installers who died, but Centrelink have never told us how many welfare recipients died. Over the last 25 years, it could be somewhere between 6,000 and 12,000. Department of Employment ministers like Tony Abbott never asked, and fax ministers like Amanda Vanstone never told. So nobody knows about this death toll. In most states, they would be considered major crimes. But they're not at this stage because no one knows about them. What on earth should you know about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights for? Very simple. If you were ever breached or you've been hit with compliance failure penalties, then your human rights have been violated. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights was first formulated in 1948, and it set out the most basic human rights of all that everybody has. Australia is a signatory to that convention, so in theory you have those rights, but here's the catch. Look at this, Article 10. Everyone is entitled in full equality to a fair and public hearing by an independent and impartial tribunal in the determination of his or her rights and obligations. Now, when you sign a New Start agreement or a job search agreement, you're agreeing to go look for jobs, etc. What you don't know is that under the old breaching rules, which were phased out on the 30th of June 2009, thankfully, there was something like 66 or 68 different ways you could be breached. There was no public hearing. There was no independent and impartial tribunal. You were just breached by Centrelink at the request of the Department of Employment. There was nothing fair, nothing impartial, nothing independent, and no public hearing. So how come it happens? Well, I wrote to the Human Rights and Equal Opportunity Commission in 2003, and I asked them precisely that very question, pointed out 24 human rights violations. Now, I'm going to show you their response, and it's a bit of bureaucratic gobbledygook, so I'll explain it in a moment. For your information, the UDHR is not one of the instruments that has been scheduled to or declared under the Human Rights and Equal Opportunity Commission Act 1986. The UDHR is a declaration by states parties of their commitment to universal human rights. Therefore, under the Human Rights and Equal Opportunity Commission Act 1986, I am unable to inquire into the allegations that articles of the UDHR have been breached. UDHR, of course, is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Now, what's all this gobbledygook saying? In 1986, breaching legislation was drawn up. It would have violated your human rights. The Human Rights and Equal Opportunity Commission would have cancelled the breaching penalty. Something had to be done. So the Australian Human Rights and Equal Opportunity Commission legislation was nobbled. Australia is probably the only country in the world where the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is one of the things that you cannot lodge a complaint under to the Human Rights Commission. It's crazy. But that's how sneaky, low-down and desperate politicians were in federal parliament to deprive welfare recipients of that legitimate right to a welfare benefit. Talk about scumbags. This is plain disgusting. It means that the deaths that occurred from breaching were premeditated. They planned on deliberately depriving welfare recipients of legitimate welfare entitlements. And they didn't give a stuff about the consequences. A reckless endangerment of human life that results in the death of a person is a major crime. If you live in Queensland, it's an unlawful killing. If you happen to live in Victoria, it's probably manslaughter due to criminal negligence. And if you live in my home state of South Australia, we're probably talking about felony murder. And that's a crime that doesn't have any statute of limitations. Now, they were planning this in 1986, and they deliberately nobbled the Human Rights and Equal Opportunity Commission just so that welfare recipients couldn't complain to the Commission when they were breached. 24 human rights. Down the drain. Now, my suggestion is to do something. That's my email address, breachresearch@gmail.com. If you know somebody who's died after being breached, or if you know somebody who's suffered from pretty horrific things, kicked out of their home because they couldn't pay the rent, couldn't buy medicine, had to resort to things like survivor sex, that's another way of saying prostitution, then drop me a line, will you? I want to take up the issue of breaching triggered fatalities with every police force in the country. They were premeditated murders. That's a gross injustice. Will you please help me to do something about that?